Hi, welcome to the State of the Biz podcast. My name is Richie Scola. I am the Chief Operating Officer at Home Source Operations. We are a single-family rental company, and I am here today with Adam Levinson, who is the Chief Investment Officer at Home Source. And today we were going to talk a little bit about the build-to-rent trend that we see in the single-family rental space, and just kind of give you our viewpoints on some of the pros and cons. So with that, Adam, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me back.
So, one of the things that we see currently in the market is the lack of inventory due to a lot of factors with low interest rates. A lot of people have equity in their homes. So with interest rates going up, maybe they're not stepping up to that next price point. They're choosing to stay put in the current home they're in, and that's putting a lot of strain on the available inventory. The last 5 years, would you say the build-to-rent trend has kind of really picked up momentum?
Yeah, I think it's getting steam for sure, and I think it's going to continue being the growth of this industry.
So what do you think as a landlord, operator, small investor, big investor, talk a little bit about why build-to-rent?
Sure. So there's several reasons why build-to-rent. As you named, the first scenario is there's been so many non-housing starts, I should say, over the course of between COVID and 08 collapse, and so the demand did not stop, but the availability of inventory slowed down quite a bit. So if you look back at housing starts, it's probably 10 to 15%. Now don't quote me on them, but 10 to 15% of what the housing starts were through a normal market. So at that point, that created a tremendous amount of low inventory, and the demand hasn't changed. And then on top of that, as you said, the interest rates. So 90% of Fannie and Freddie books are 4 and 3% mortgages. So no one's going to move. They're not going to go step up. The economy definitely has headwinds, as we know. We don't know exactly what that's all going to turn out to. But again, the demand is there. The fundamentals in the single-family rental space is there. It's 100% a burgeoning asset class that has definitely come into its own with mature debt. And that being said, the growth, in my opinion, has to come from build to rent because there's just not available inventory. So I think as you see this grow, and just to give you an idea of the landscape, there's 14 million single-family detached residential homes for rent in America, give or take. And of those 14 million, the institutions own 2 to 3%.
Wow.
So it's really in its infancy. I think you'll see a lot of changing from the mom and pops. I think we're in a transition or a consolidation, almost like when the hardware stores got consolidated to Home Depot and Lowe's. And people are more transient, I believe. So nobody really wants to be the younger generation. Don't want to be tethered down to a house. They want to move. They work from home. So they have the luxury of being able to live where they want to live. And so I think between that and between the idea of just rentals in general, because I think over the last generations that we could see and around, people got really hurt with real estate and the idea of, that's the best asset you could ever own and you're going to retire from it. Well, that hasn't played out. So I think there's a lot of people that say, hey, it's a house, it's cheaper to rent it, and I don't need that to be my largest asset. I don't believe that that's really true anymore. It might have been if you bought a house in the 70s for $5,000 and now it's worth $500,000. If you buy a house for $500,000 now, it's not going to be worth $50 million in 10 years. So I think that's over. So I think
so both of us having lived through being in the business in the last downturn, collapse, call it, this is what we're in right now, call it the last 16 months since rates started really going up and kind of some headwinds as an investor. This doesn't have the same stress in the market that we did in 08. Now, I don't have a crystal ball, and neither do you. We talk about these conversations all the time. We don't know what the future holds, but it certainly feels different from the what we think will be available inventory. So can you speak, because I know you were on the front lines there in South Florida at the time, so you were at ground zero. So because of those liar loans and the crazy things.
It's just
talk about that.
Yeah, so the leverage, it was way more. I mean, everybody was over-levered. The rates were very high. There was all those option arms. So as they went from 3% to get you in, the ninja loans, you're getting now they're 14, 15%, I think 8% max. Not 14, but you go from 3% to 7%. You really can't afford 7%. You can only afford 3%. So then what happens is these houses are unaffordable. So now you have 30-year fixed debt at 3 and 4 and 90% of the book out there. Nobody's moving. Even
Right.
if they wanted to, they're not going to, because they can't afford it. Housing prices have continued to go up. So now you're not going to go from a $2,000 payment to a $2,000 payment because you're going to get half the house. So you're not going to leave.
Right.
So as we are continuing to grow as a population and as society, and people are moving out and people are getting jobs, and you need housing because that doesn't stop, it's going to have to be available new construction. And really, the available new construction has to be affordable housing under $400,000.
So do you think the cost to build, just replacement costs, have gone up exponentially in the last 3 years? It's really, had some rocket fuel underneath it, as we've seen in our business. But, that plays into this as well, because, when we talk about a starter home, that price point, depending on what market you're in, is somewhat unobtainable to a lot of folks.
So I have a little bit of experience in the building area, and I can tell you that it used to cost $25,000 to get a pad ready for a house. Now you're $65,000, $70,000 to get a pad ready. So that same $100,000 lot used to be $50,000. So you have that problem. Then you were able to build, entry level stuff for $60 a foot. Now you're at $85, $90 a foot. So just that in general, you're talking 30% increase in the same house, just in maybe 35% increase in building costs, and then that doesn't include labor as well.
Right,
so
which is a big problem.
It's so you really, an affordable house is $350,000. That's the cheapest you could build a house.
Brand new, right?
Brand new.
Yeah, depending on the market, but that's pretty consistent across.
That's consistent. You have so the only thing that may change is your dirt will be $30,000 cheaper. So your $100,000 lot is $70,000. So your $350,000 house is $320,000, $310,000. But it's
and
still
that
the same
might be
thing.
you're 60 miles outside of a metro MSA as opposed to within 30 miles, right? Because
yeah.
the land cost is what's.
That's
where it all starts.
It's land cost, right? You have your land cost, then you have your equipment, which then takes extra fuel, and it's a trickle down effect because there's fuel to make building material, there's fuel to move dirt, so now that's adding to the cost. Just inflation is adding to the cost of material, and then inflation is adding to labor. So couple that all together, it's a 35% increase from what you've seen. So there's not even enough, like as you said, you really have to go way outside to go ahead and be able to put the product on the ground. And rents are, staying pretty stable. Certain markets where they overbuilt, but I think the headlines, they narrow in on, hey, you know what, your rents are coming down, the prices are coming down. Well, that's where they've overbuilt and they've oversupplied. As you know, and as we talk about all the time, you have absorption, right? So if you're building 6 houses and you can only absorb 2, you're going to have a problem. That's where the prices are going to go down. But when you're building 6 and you can absorb 6, you can absorb 7,
right.
You're not going to have a problem there. And so that's when you go, what happened was, when it was a land grab, so to speak, and everybody was getting into the single-family rental space,
So
they
we're
went
talking
everywhere.
2012, call it, right?
I think 12, it really started ramping up, 13, 14, 15, and they just bought anything, right? So
Right.
it didn't really matter.
Because they were buying things well below replacement
well below
cost.
replacement cost.
Yeah.
But and then when the build-to-rent thing happened, then you needed inventory. Then they went and they said, I'm going to do a deal here. And then they go ahead, they buy a piece of dirt, and they thought, build it and they will come. Well, you know what? If you don't have the household formation, you don't have the income, because we do the income approach, you don't have the schools, you don't have the absorption, well, now you're going to be sitting with empty houses. So you hear those headlines. Yeah, that's
Right.
true, because they didn't do the proper due diligence. They bought the properties in the wrong place, and they don't have the base to go ahead and absorb these things. So they will get absorbed, but
Over time, yeah.
over time,
Yeah.
of course. And some maybe not. I mean, you've seen throughout history, like Flint, Michigan, or you go to these places where they're just, they're just deserts. Well, that's going to be the case. The same way, just because you built a new product, if you go in the middle of nowhere and build a brand new house and somebody rent it, it's going to be an overgrown,
So
empty house.
if you build it, they don't necessarily come right away.
I don't even think right away they don't come. They don't come. Yeah, you need to you have to start with good fundamentals, good job creation, good employment growth, and a good fundamental business with a good household formation, and then you start looking for it. The problem is, a lot of folks, because this was an exciting business to get into, and they just said, let me do the numbers, hey, it works, and didn't realize all the other things that went into it, which
Right.
is, are there people that rent these things? Can they afford to move in them?
That's the other thing.
And then who's going to manage it?
That's a great point. And you work with a lot of builders across the Southeast and the Midwest that we do projects with. What are some of are there any creative things that you've seen them do to try and maybe obtain land, or maybe infrastructure that wasn't in place, call it roads and sewers, that
Sure.
like alternatives that they're trying to keep up with the demand in some of these markets, because some of these markets are really growing rapidly. Since COVID, people are moving around, and a lot of these places in the Southeast and Midwest are really well behind, to the tune of tens of thousands of homes. What are some of the things?
Yeah, the biggest issues you have is sewer capacity and septic. Sewer and water. Right. So septic is okay, but you still can't get water out there. So that's why you're seeing a lot of pop-up wells and septic, because you could put that in the middle of nowhere. But if you want to get on the grids are just not big enough to absorb it, so they have to grow. So there's areas here in Charlotte that you can get land at a decent price, but it's 5 to 7 years out before you'll be able to tap into the sewer and the water.
It doesn't matter how
it
cheap
doesn't
the
matter.
water is, yeah.
So what is happening, and so we buy in Wichita, which is pretty interesting. The city sees the growth, they want the growth, they have employment coming in, they need the housing. They are going ahead and giving bonds, community development bonds, and they are then taking those bonds and building out the infrastructure, and then it gets absorbed into an HOA or into the taxes, and us as the investors have a little bit higher tax base for the first 20 years to pay off the community development bond. But that's how, so they're building the infrastructure, and that's where the money's coming from. It's going into the tax base.
Wow,
so that's pretty interesting stuff.
Yeah. What about, is there a dedicated septic plants? Some of the groups I know that we've had conversation with, they put dedicated within the almost off-site within the community on the property.
Correct.
Like water treatment plants and stuff like that.
Yeah, so they have, there's some new technology out there that has community septic. So they put one community septic and all of the houses tie in. And then they also have community wells. So when you go out, when you go outside, that's the benefit of going just outside, basically where the pipe ends, we'll call it the sewer or the septic. You can then put these community septics in, these community wells. Your taxes are going to be half the price. You're just a half a mile or a mile off the grid there, and you put in a community septic, community wells. It's cheaper to live there. It's cheaper to operate them, and the taxes are cheaper. So I think it's a good play. It's not 10 miles off the beaten path. It's a half a mile off the
where it ends. Yeah. And like, I grew up on Long Island, 50 years ago, and my parents bought the house that they still live in today. It was on a septic system, not city sewer. So,
my
cesspool, and we used to get it pumped every time, and my father would jump up and down and scream and yell about, you damn kids, you got to, putting too much down the toilet. But I mean, it's a feasible option. Obviously, I think preference is city sewer is always great.
City
sewer
great.
And water, but it's a real viable solution. It happens all the time.
Listen, there's brand new septics. If you take care of them, it's cheaper to build the house. Your OpEx is a little bit more than it would be being on city, but your taxes are less. So net, I believe you're less, and you just have to have them on a routine, and it's just another maintenance item that you have to add into your operating costs, and understand that, hey, this is something you got to take care of. If it's new and it's maintained, I don't really see a problem with it.
What about what are some of the creative things that these builders are starting to do as they design these homes with the thought of these are build-to-rent communities?
Sure.
What are some of the features you've seen them add that have made it a little different? Maybe
Sure.
it's.
I'll tell you some interesting stuff. So they put no fences in on some of these neighborhoods, and they mow all the grass. So they make them wide enough that they can go ahead and just go and mow everybody's grass. They put the hot water heaters and the AC condenser units on an outside entrance, so so they can go ahead and service units outside without disturbing the residents. They are, some of these designated communities, they're offering laundry service. They're offering different, where you could create ancillary income. But I think that the idea is, hey, these single-family designated communities, I believe they are, they're better to operate. You're going to have economies of scale. But on top of that, they're going to look more like a lived-in neighborhood that are owned. And they'll actually look better, because if you have an owner of a property taking care of 100 houses, they're all going to look the same. If you have 100 different owners, some don't have money, some don't take care of it. So you're going to go.
Some edge the lawn, some don't. Some weed, some don't weed, some never mow.
Correct. Or water.
Or water.
So I used to own a load of houses in Florida, and it was so much money to water, no one watered. So it was just dirt. And then you go in, and then if I blindfolded you, I took you into these two neighborhoods, you say, oh, definitely a rental neighborhood. Well, that's the one that's owned by people. Rental neighborhoods owned by an institution. Everything is run like a business.
Right.
You take care of people like a business. You treat them well. So I know there's a lot of talk about how the institutions they're raising the rents, and it's Wall Street. But the reality is you're providing a better product. When you're in mom and pop, and your AC breaks, they're going to go ahead and doctor it up. They're going to tell you they're going to take a while to get out there. They're going to try to just repair it, and you're going to be in potentially uncomfortable living conditions where, you're an institution. We want to go ahead. We want to get good ratings. We want to have we want to create a brand. We're going to go and put an AC. We're going to go ahead. We're going to spread it out. And the benefit of being larger, the larger you are, you can spread your costs. So when you own one house and you have one AC break, you're in problem.
Yeah.
When you own 100 houses, that gets spread across 100 houses.
Yeah.
You're able to. So the larger you get, the more efficient you could run and the better service you could provide to the residents.
Wow. And as far as the appeal for the build to rent, from the renter standpoint, right? A lot of the younger folks that more contemporary floor plans, right? It's,
Sure.
it's newer finishes,
You
right?
got newer finishes. It's a nicer house that they couldn't get. You have all of these houses were in mind. The work from home is a real thing. It's not going away. So we create, even if it's a small office, if it has a little window, it doesn't matter if it's a closet. If it has a window, it gives that feel of a nice office, and you're with people that are generally going to stay. Our average tenancy is 3 years versus 15 months. So people get ingrained. They're in the community. Their kids go to school. They make friends, and it's really more of a lifestyle. It's a home. It's more of a lifestyle. And we have residents that have been there 10 years.
Yeah.
Where are they going?
What about in the community itself, outside of the sticks and bricks? What are some of the things that you see in certain communities that they put in there?
So I think everybody's tried a little bit of this, the pools, the gyms, the this, the that. But at the end of the day, I think that's just maintenance costs. It's maintenance problems. And so what seems to be very appealing is everybody has dogs. They love their dogs.
Yeah, great.
So dog parks and greenways and just jungle gym type stuff, like nothing crazy and nothing that requires maintenance. I think that's what's settled on is, hey, this is what makes sense.
Wow, that's great. Let me ask you this. When we think about the locations for these types of properties, most typically metro areas have already been, saturated. There's if we think about some of the areas we're in, some 16 markets, it's very hard to get anything close to the metro area just because it's already been developed. What are some of the considerations from an underwriting standpoint as far as we want to look at certain tracts of land in certain areas that have?
So
what are some of the key things that it's kind of a litmus test?
So you want to have access to major arteries, super important. You want to have some community shops within there that you don't have to drive 15 miles to go get groceries. And as you know, when you live in 123 Main Street in nowhere. You don't leave 123 Main Street and nowhere unless you go on the work.
The 5 mile bubble.
So it's the same thing. So you have these communities, and as there's enough communities, you have a gas station, a grocery store, a few restaurants, and you're able to service those areas because you're not going to be the only community. You're spreading out together. Mm-hmm. So the infrastructure is going to spread out. But as long as you're close to major arteries where, okay, I'm 10 miles from downtown, let's say, or from a populated area, but I got to go down this one major artery at 55 miles an hour because that's the speed limit. I'm there in 7 minutes. Yeah, and that's kind of what we look at is it convenient to have a life out there? And
with typical resident profile for call it over 4,000 homes that we own and operate, most of those folks 70% of them have children, so obviously. Schools come into play, right?
Schools, children. Yeah, school is number one, obviously, right? Because you want to get somebody in and you want them to stay.
I always typically keeps them grounded.
You got good schools. You do a good resident underwriting. You try very hard to get nice people in there that are have a job and they're good community, good pillars of society that are contributing and they're not derelicts. And you try your best. Obviously you don't know. And again, the schools and you go ahead and get near the major arteries and near the community shops, and you create an environment where people say, hey, I don't own it, but it's a home.
Yeah.
And I think and they're not going to leave if the schools are good, if they have all their conveniences met, and you're number one, you're taking care of them. I always say in this business, it's not really very sophisticated. How do you get them in as fast as you can, have them call you as little as possible, and stay in as long as you can?
Yeah.
And a lot of, and you know this better than me, but a lot of the headlines are 10% rent growth, 12% rent growth, 10%, and then they sell that story, and then yes, you got $100 bump or $150 bump in rent, but it costs you $15,000 to get that. It's going to take you 5 years to make your money back. It's not a good economic decision. So I think what really has helped us over the years is we've had partners that think entrepreneurial, and they say, okay, if I put in this money, how long is it going to take me to get it back? Is it going to help me rent this house faster? And on the bottom line, is it going to change my return? If it's not, then we're not going to do it. Rather than, hey, we're getting 10%, because I think they sell that stuff, and that's what I just, in my opinion, I've been in both the institutional world and the retail world, where I have a partner that used to say, you put $1 in, it goes through the machine. How much is down at the end of the day?
Yeah.
That's what matters. You got this metric and that metric, but at the end of the day, you have $1,000 out there. You want to make this return. It has to be rented this long, and it has to cost this much, so this much is left at the end of the day. And so they make it very sophisticated, but that's it.
So with that in mind, just thinking about what does it take to from start to finish, and even a timeline, if you would. You know, we're working to grow our portfolio actively, and we're looking at build to rent projects all the time, and some of them we've already executed on and have been very successful with. But just kind of give us an overview, like, hey, you're working with ABC Builder, and they come and say, Adam, we've got this track. Like,
sure.
What is it? Give me a timeline, and then the phases that go with that, just to put it in context.
Sure. So that's a great question. So every build is the same, and there's different stages of development. You have raw land to get it entitled. That could take 18 months. And then entitled dirt, where someone can close and have land disturbance permits in hand. You know, let's call it 100 home neighborhood, take you 10 months to get it ready. So the raw dirt to entitlement, we don't mess around with that. So we may contract with a group and say, hey, we're going to take these 100 homes. You're moving dirt. We're going to go to contract. You're going to start moving dirt tomorrow. The first house will be delivered, let's say it's 10 months to get the house ready, to get the pads ready to build, and then another 90 days to build the house.
So when you say moving dirt, you're putting roads and sewers, right? They're not moving dirt going vertical yet.
So horizontal and vertical. So when I say move dirt, and it's horizontal, you're putting in the roads, you're clearing all the land, right. You're putting in the sewer taps, you're putting in the septic, the water, whatever you're going to do,
right.
And you get them ready, and you run all the utilities, and you get them ready to pad ready to go ahead and go vertical, sticks up.
Okay.
So on a 100-unit community, generally, if the lots are not finished, you're going to have probably 10 months ballpark to get the first lot ready to go sticks up. And then it'll take 90 days. So it could take almost 13 months to get the first house delivered. Now, generally, what we would say is, how many can you absorb, right? So let's say it's a 100-unit community, and you could absorb 6 a month. Well, we don't want more than 6 a month delivered. And so we work with the builder, and we'll start 6 every 90 days. We'll start 6 the first, and then every month we'll start another 6, because then they'll be being delivered, and we could pre-lease them, and then we'll rent up 6 a month.
So almost like a model home on the first one, and then lease.
So it'll take you 2 years to get a 100-unit community, 26 months to get a 100 community finished. Now, if they already have pad ready and you're going vertical, you save that 10 months. But no matter what, you're really not going to absorb more than 5 or 6 a month. It's rare that you'd absorb more than that.
Right.
Now, you could absorb more than that if you have multiple communities, but in one community, we've learned between 4 to 7, 4 to 6.
Depending on seasonality too, right? Depending on the time of year.
Yeah, and you know that better than me, right? Seasonality, time of year, there's a million different factors. But we throttle it up or throttle it down based on it. But we start the pre-lease 90 days out. So this way, in a perfect world, we want to have a sheet like, we see how they move in, we see how they move in, we see how they move in.
Right. So that's almost like it's basically a horizontal multifamily concept.
That's the way I look at it. That's exactly what it is. So
right.
So it's a horizontal horizontal apartment complex. People have dogs, have kids, want this space. They don't want to live in an apartment. They don't want to buy a house.
Yeah.
This is something that has not been out there. Multifamily's been out there forever. People have been living in apartments for eons, right? And now it's so now you have a different asset class. People are still going to be renters. You have a certain set of the population that's always going to be renters, which I believe is growing based on, kind of the way things are going and the world is going. And as it grows, they're going to need this product. And so you have population growth, so you need more houses to begin with. And as the population is growing, they're not buyers, they're renters. So everything is growing the same way it did, but instead of the retail product, the build-to-rent product is coming in.
Great. Awesome. Well, this has been great information, Adam. I appreciate you giving us this insight, and we wanted to make sure we talked about this because it's a very big part of our business, and a lot of people, even though it's been around for 5 or 7 years, a lot of people are still wondering what is build to rent and why build to rent. So
right.
Appreciate the conversation. Appreciate everybody tuning in. If you got some value out of this content, maybe hit the like button.
Smash up the
Hit
like,
the like
smash
button.
'em
If
up.
you have any content that you'd like for us to cover, put something in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. Good, bad, doesn't matter. But we appreciate everybody tuning in. Until next time, Adam, thank you so much for all the wisdom.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody.